personality disorder. You know, our statistical manual, we're on the 5th edition now, DSM-5 is what it's called. It's that thick. An anti-personality disorder has that many pages in it.
Yeah, there probably needs to be a lot more.
Well, we've had 5 editions of it, and everything changes. What I'm talking about today, 2 manuals ago, we wouldn't have had that. We had oppositional disorder at that point.
Well, thank God we live in a time where we can know the difference.
Yeah, but you know, the sad reality is that what we are doing in the 21st century in psychology will be looked upon as primitive.
Probably.
You did this.
So I'm curious, if you looked at Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, what would you classify these 2 literary people?
Okay. I think you have to say Moriarty is a psychopath. I have to do that.
Yeah.
You have to say it just from what we've discussed. And the idea is that Moriarty doesn't deviate that much. If he deviates, it's often to advance his cause or to do dirt to the serious brother. I look more at Sherlock Holmes as more of along the autistic spectrum, and I look more toward the Asperger syndrome type of person with comorbidity of an addictive personality disorder.
Oh,
because
very interesting.
because I mean, there's so many things that he does that are not compulsive. I mean, even though it seems that way, they're often to put him into a frame of reference by which he can do thus and so. Right. I really think because of the way he interacts with people is that it's more of a spectrum than Asperger's spectrum. But Moriarty, psychopath.
You wouldn't classify him as a sociopath.
No, I wouldn't. No.
Because he plans.
Also, he's sensitive to the impact of horrible behaviors on other people. Even though it seems like he's treating it as a very interesting study, he's actually treating it so that he can somehow or the other help a person or other persons that might be victims. So that's the way I would look at it.
Do you think literature accurately portrays these people?
I think the best written ones do.
Okay.
I think you and I could sit down and, from what we know of the difference between psychopathology and sociopathology, just answer yes or no. Does this character fit into this or not? And if he does fit into this, or she fit into this, does she fit in this spectrum or that spectrum? The psychopathology. I think a well-written one will do that. What I said before when we were talking earlier is I think a number of people just use these terms interchangeably, and it doesn't help us push the ball forward because there are some very interesting things going on. If you want to go back to that old argument of nature-nurture, psychopath is nature. Sociopath is nurture.
Well, that's what I meant more about the accurate portrayal. Because
I see it sometimes as it's just a throwaway word.
Then it doesn't quite fit with what they're throwing out in the book. And I'm like, this doesn't ring true to me.
Yeah. The other thing is, I mean, there's so many rich types of ways that people present themselves. I mean, the whole schizophrenic spectrum is very interesting because there's schizotypal, there's schizophrenic, there's all of these kinds of behaviors that come on at a later time in life, in their 18s to 20-somethings. And they've been moving along quite well. What went wrong there?
Yeah.
I think would be a brilliant thing to write about. I know that there have been some good books written on schizophrenia, but I just don't see it very much.
What is the youngest age somebody can be diagnosed as a sociopath?
I think from very early on. The psychopaths. Easiest diagnosis, to my way of thinking, for young age is the psychopath. You look for patterns of violence, you look for patterns of fire setting, you look for patterns of hurting animals, you look for patterns of brutal behavior toward smaller children. All of those kinds of things violate the rights of other people and operate without a frame of conscience. In fact, there's been a brilliant book written, and I hate to tell you this, but I read it in 1972 called Children Without a Conscience. And there's some they read as well as some of the mystery books I've read. These patterns of children that come to light.
You never read that?
It's easy to get. Children Without a Conscience.
Okay. Now,
I gave the book away, or I give it to you. I gave a lot of my college books away, my university books away to the counselors in Baltimore County. I was invited to a speaking engagement for Baltimore County counselors, and I thought, all these books, I'm going to put them in boxes.
Yeah.
My children are going to say, Dad, why do you have and I put 400 books. But one of them was Children Without a Conscience.
Okay.
Children Without a Conscience. I'm pretty sure that's the title. Yeah.
We'll have to look for that. Now, what about, because I've heard that there is also childhood trauma that plays into like a head trauma or something, that a lot of them, when they trace back some of these serial killers, that a lot of them had some kind of a head trauma.
You're kind of in an area where I'm not an expert in that.
Okay.
But let me just tell you what I think happens is that with closed head trauma, you have a disruption in cognitive processing. I could see all sorts of terrible ramifications for that, as far as a person then not being as able to control impulses as before, the idea of a person not cognitively working from cause to effect and that sort of thing, maybe because of this, maybe a greater impulse toward anger, all those sort of things, all of which are deadly consequences of having the structure that you had disrupted by something else. I mean, we see what closed head trauma can do for soldiers as far as mobility, that sort of thing. Well, just think about it as far as processing ideas. I wouldn't see that that's not an uncommon thing.
I'll interject here because it reminded me of someone I know who had HIV and it affected his brain, and I could just see him becoming less and less empathetic. He became an alcoholic.
Interesting.
Sure.
Can you cure a psychopath?
I think you can work with it. Let's kind of go back over this, all right? The first thing you got to remember when you ask me, can you cure, is that quite often a person like myself works with a willing patient.
Right.
Now, just from what I've told you about this 1% and this 4%, they're not willing because they don't see themselves as having problems. Basically, what you have to do is you have to get them at a point where they really don't have too many options. And that's usually when they're incarcerated or they're in a mental institution or something along this line. And what often has shown not to work is talk therapy. But there have been some medications that have curbed the impulsivity. And they take clozapine, I think, is one, but there are some advances. And that's why I said earlier to Tracy, I mean, what we're doing now in 2018 is going to look like we're backwoods Stone Age people.
Right.
You know, backwoods Stone Age. I'm not sure we could work that out. But backwoods people as far as medications. When I started off, there were something in the neighborhood of maybe 5 or 6 drugs for bipolar disorder, you know, which is called manic depressive at that time. Okay. Now, the last time I heard, there were 232 approved medications. Now, that doesn't mean there's probably 1,000 more in the pipeline, but that's what I mean, Kathleen, by the idea of Stone Age type of things. You know, that what'll happen, you know, who knows where. You know, I firmly believe that, you know, we're going to have that white feather thing with the Alzheimer, the first person that's cured of Alzheimer's, basically because I think there are still a number of different processes. You know, yeah. Right now, first of all, I don't think you get anywhere, Ann, without the person being trapped to where he doesn't have an alternative, where you can confront him and say, you tell me you don't have a problem, you're in jail, I'm not in jail. Right. You're in jail because of your behavior. I have a medication that can help you curb that behavior that's getting you sent back to jail because you've already got 2 strikes, 1 more strike and you're out.
Right. But my question is more focused on if you have a small child, 4 or 5, he's killing the neighbor's dogs, setting fires. Is there something you can do?
I would think there would be, but I would tell you the truth, that's not an area I've studied. Yeah. I know that the medication I just talked about is for adults only.
Right.
So I would not know whether that works or not. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that would be a wonderful question to ask a Pete at some point, you know. Right. You know, Pete that does psychiatric type of, Hopkins has them all, you know.
Well,
throw a stone, you'd hit one, you know.
There was the bad seeds. that he was just born bad. That's what the book touted.
Right, but my thing is, could you grab that child at a small age if you recognize we got a problem?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they do. I think they've gotten better at diagnosing.
Oh, yeah.
If they see a child starting to harm animals and things, they know what to look for now. It used to be, boys will be boys, but it's not like that anymore. People are more in tune to notice things like that.
I would agree.
Right.
I would agree.
Now, what about a character like Norman Bates?
Okay.
What would he be classified as?
First of all, you got to remember, Norman has hallucinations and, of course, fixated on mother. Oh, God. He's one of those, I have to say,
he's nuts.
Well, he did all kinds of stuff.
He definitely had mother issues.
What basically they're trying to present him to you as is a schizophrenic, hallucination, that sort of thing. But, he operates in lots of different ways. I mean, he's got the peeping Tom thing going for him. He's got the murderous side. I think he's a wonderful creation by Alfred Hitchcock. But if you really wanted to get down to it, he probably would be looked upon as a sociopath, but with schizotypal behaviors.
What about Hannibal Lecter?
Hannibal Lecter, of course, is a wonderful example of a person who operates without a conscience, exults in operating without a conscience. He's brilliant, so that kind of like push you more toward the psychopath one. And believe me, the psychopaths are wonderful characters for novels, for the stuff you love to read and that sort of thing. They're delightful. They're wonderful. Also, if you think about it, I mean, what do you remember about Hannibal Lecter? You remember him eating the liver with some fava beans. And you remember that horrible sound he makes.
Yeah.
Well, but why? Because basically he flaunts every kind of norm that you and I would operate on.
Well, what I found more interesting about him, the relationship he had with Clarice Starling, that how he manipulated her, and it was so brilliant.
That's Psychopathology 101. Mm-hmm. Absolutely wonderful, They manipulate in all different ways. Bundy manipulated in a very sexually charged environment. He manipulates in, I'm smarter than you are. I can get you to agree to this. I can get you to this stage.
But he used that wounded bird.
Yeah.
Well, he used whatever tools he needed.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely marvelous. Yeah.
Played him like a fiddle.
Really, if you get right down to it, he's a psychopath that just blooms beautifully.
Silence of the Lambs were about Buffalo Bill.
Buffalo Bill.
In Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, God. Well, that's a whole different issue because that's the covering of the skin and eye. I mean, that goes into whole areas of fetishism and psychosexual stuff going on there, man. I
think what's more interesting.
Thank God I didn't work at a mental institution.
Is characters like Sherlock Holmes that operate in the real world as people who are supposed to be helping people, and that there's this whole underside of it that are they necessarily good? Right. Do they have an evil side?
Right. Can you use your powers for good or evil?
Exactly.
I read a book. It was a nonfiction book, and I cannot remember because it's been years since I read it. But it was a serial killer, and they caught him. And, of course, he was saying he was mentally ill. Well, they found, when they searched his home, all these stories of he was copying.
Sure.
So he made a study of it.
Exactly.
To copy their ways so they wouldn't catch
All right, and therefore you get another difference between sociopathology and psychopathology. He's a planner, which means he's a psycho. Right. He'll tend toward the psychopath side of the spectrum.
Right.
Well, from what I understand, they enjoy the planning part more than they do the actual.
Sure, because I'm on parade at this moment. I'm very much in control.
It's a letdown when they actually did the murder.
Mm-hmm. Well, then they got to get rid of the body and all that kind of scruffy stuff.
So they're getting one over on the rest of them.
They're smarter than everybody else.
Well, it's amazing to me, books that were from, like when Sherlock Holmes was written and when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote those books, that, like you said, we're in the dark ages now of social sciences, and that it's interesting that he got so many things correct.
Dead on.
Well,
But I guess there
Doyle
were
was a
people like
doctor, but psychopathy, the study of it wasn't as advanced as it is today. He was a doctor, so I'm sure that
He had some knowledge
Right.
of this stuff.